The wind carried dust through the streets of Old Tucson, Arizona Territory, as Violet Brenner watched her last hope disappear with the stagecoach that rumbled away into the distance. She'd spent her final dollar on the telegram that now lay crumpled in her hand, the reply as blunt as the desert landscape around her. Position filled, stop, regret, stop. The schoolteacher job in Santa Fe she'd traveled over 300 miles to secure was gone, leaving her stranded in this frontier town with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small carpet bag at her feet. It was 1878, and the West was as unforgiving as it was promising. Violet sat on a rough-hewn bench outside Holbrook's General Store, her navy blue traveling dress collecting the fine desert dust that seemed to coat everything in this town. At 22, she was far from the sheltered life she'd known in Boston, where her father's passing had left her with little choice but to seek opportunity in the expanding territories. "You look like you could use company," came a deep voice from above her. Violet looked up, shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun. A tall figure stood before her, silhouetted against the golden light. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a man perhaps 5 or 6 years her senior, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of faded denim. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a simple cotton shirt beneath a leather vest, sturdy trousers tucked into well-used boots. The battered hat he removed revealed sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. "I'm quite fine, thank you," Violet replied automatically, though the slight quaver in her voice betrayed her. The stranger's eyes fell to the crumpled telegram in her hand, but he made no comment on it. Instead, he simply nodded toward the empty space beside her. "Mind if I rest a spell?" "Been in the saddle since sunup." Violet hesitated, then slid slightly to the side. Proper Boston upbringing warned against conversing with strange men, but this was the frontier. Different rules applied here, rules she was still learning. "Wade Andrews," he said as he settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Local rancher." "Violet Brenner," she returned, her voice still stiff with formality. "New to Old Tucson." He wasn't looking at her, but rather gazing out at the street, which somehow made the conversation less intrusive. "Is it that obvious?" A slight smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Well, madam, in a town this size, most folks know each other, and I'd surely remember you." The comment brought a flush to Violet's cheeks, but before she could respond, her stomach betrayed her with an audible rumble. She hadn't eaten since the meager breakfast at dawn, having saved her last coins for the telegram. Wade Andrews pretended not to notice. "Mrs. Garcia at the boarding house serves the best supper in the territory. I was headed there myself." He paused, then added carefully, "It wouldn't be proper for me to invite you to dine with me, being strangers and all, but I reckon you might find your way there on your own accord around 6 o'clock. Violet stared at him, torn between pride and practicality. "Mr. Andrews, while I appreciate the subtle invitation, I'm afraid I cannot." "Sometimes," he interrupted gently, "pride is a luxury, Miss Brenner." His eyes finally met hers directly. "I've been where you're sitting. First day I came to the territory, I had $2 and a lame horse." "And now you have a ranch?" she asked, unable to hide her skepticism. "Now I have a small spread, 6 good hands working for me, and enough cattle to keep us fed." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "The West gives back what you put into it, Miss Brenner. But first, you've got to survive it." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, boots kicking up small puffs of dust as he crossed the street toward the livery. Violet watched him go, fighting the conflicting emotions within her. She'd come west for independence, not to be rescued by the first man who offered her a meal. And yet, as the sun dipped lower and the desert air chilled, practicality began to win over pride. The boarding house Wade had mentioned stood 2 blocks away, a modest 2-story adobe structure with bright blue window frames and a sign that simply read Garcia's. As 6 o'clock approached, Violet found herself standing outside, drawn by both hunger and curiosity. She had exactly 23 cents in her reticule, not enough for a meal, certainly not enough for a room. Through the windows, she could see a warm glow and the movement of people. The aroma of spices and fresh bread wafted out, making her stomach protest even louder. Just as she was about to turn away, the door opened. "You coming in or just planning to admire my paintwork?" asked a robust woman with silver-streaked black hair and an apron dusted with flour. I was just," Violet stammered. "You must be the young lady Wade mentioned." The woman's dark eyes were kind but shrewd. "I'm Esperanza Garcia. My husband Mateo and I run this place." "Violet Brenner," she replied automatically. "Well, Miss Brenner, supper's getting cold and I don't serve it twice." Mrs. Garcia held the door open wider. With one last moment of hesitation, Violet stepped inside. The main room was larger than it appeared from outside, with a long table in the center surrounded by smaller ones. A few travelers and local townspeople were already seated, and at the far end sat Wade Andrews, deep in conversation with an older man. Mrs. Garcia led her to a small table near the fireplace. "Sit, eat, worry about the rest tomorrow." "But I don't have," Violet began in a whisper. The older woman waved her hand dismissively. "Did I ask for payment?" "No, when you can pay, you will. That's how it works here." Before Violet could protest further, a plate appeared before her, a generous portion of some kind of stew with corn and peppers, a thick slice of bread still warm from the oven, and a mug of hot coffee. Across the room, Wade glanced her way but made no move to join her. He simply gave a slight nod before returning to his conversation. The message was clear. He had pointed her toward help, but she was free to make her own way. Violet ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as the rich flavors satisfied a need deeper than she'd realized. Around her, the dining room hummed with conversation, miners discussing claims, a cattle buyer arguing prices with a local rancher, 2 women debating the merits of different fabric for curtains. It was a tapestry of frontier life, and for the first time since arriving, Violet felt less like an outsider. Mrs. Garcia appeared with a second slice of bread just as Violet was sopping up the last of her stew. "Thank you," Violet said sincerely. "This is the finest meal I've had in weeks." "Good. Now, about your situation." Mrs. Garcia pulled up a chair, her voice low but matter-of-fact. "Wade tells me you're looking for work." Violet cast a glance toward Wade, who was now paying his bill at the counter. "I hadn't actually mentioned that to Mr. Andrews. He's observant." "Most men aren't, but that one sees more than he lets on." Mrs. Garcia folded her hands on the table. "We have no schoolteacher position here, if that's what you were hoping for." Violet sighed. "That was my plan in Santa Fe, yes. But you have education." "I attended the Boston Female Seminary." "I can teach reading, writing, mathematics, history, basic sciences, and music. I speak passable French and can sew well enough." Mrs. Garcia nodded thoughtfully. "Old Tucson has no proper school yet, though there's talk of building one, but there are families with children who would pay for lessons. And the mercantile needs someone who can keep proper books." Mr. Holbrook's eyesight isn't what it was. Hope flickered in Violet's chest for the first time that day. "Do you really think?" "I think a young woman with education has options, even here." Mrs. Garcia stood. "You'll stay here tonight. We have a small room at the back. Tomorrow we'll see about those options." "I can't accept charity," Violet protested weakly. "It's not charity to help someone who will soon be contributing to our town." Mrs. Garcia replied firmly. "Besides, I could use help with the breakfast rush." "You can work for your keep until something better comes along." As Mrs. Garcia walked away, Violet noticed Wade watching from near the door. He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute before stepping out into the night. That night, in the tiny but clean room at the back of the boarding house, Violet lay awake pondering the strange turn her journey had taken. She'd planned everything so carefully the teaching position in Santa Fe would have given her independence and respectability. Now she was adrift in a town she'd never intended to visit, relying on the kindness of strangers. And then there was Wade Andrews, the cowboy who'd seen her need without making her feel pitied. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quiet confidence that seemed earned rather than assumed. In Boston, she'd met plenty of men who wore their accomplishments like badges. Wade wore his like comfortable, well-worn boots. Sleep eventually claimed her, bringing dreams of open skies and possibilities she hadn't considered when she'd boarded that stagecoach in Denver. Morning came with the scent of coffee and baking bread. Violet dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical brown calico that had seen better days but would serve for work. She pinned her chestnut hair in a simple knot and splashed water on her face from the basin. Mrs. Garcia put her to work immediately, serving plates of eggs and bacon to the early risers and pouring endless cups of coffee. By mid-morning, Violet's feet ached, but there was satisfaction in the work. She'd never been one to shy away from effort, even in her more privileged days in Boston. "You handle yourself well," Mrs. Garcia observed as they cleared the breakfast dishes. "Some fine ladies would turn up their noses at serving tables." "I've never considered myself too fine for honest work," Violet replied, scraping plates into a bucket for the chickens out back. "Good. Because I've arranged for you to meet Mr. Holbrook at 11. If he likes you, he might take you on at the Mercantile." Violet nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Today. But I no time like the present," Mrs. Garcia said with finality. "Wash up, put on your best dress, and show him what Boston education looks like." At precisely 11 o'clock, Violet stood before the counter at Holbrook's General Store, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. Mr. Holbrook was a thin man with spectacles that seemed too small for his face, constantly peering over them rather than through them. "Bookkeeping, eh?" he said after she'd explained her qualifications. "Show me your figures." He thrust a ledger at her. For the next hour, Violet demonstrated her ability with numbers, quickly spotting several discrepancies in his accounts and explaining them clearly. By the end, Mr. Holbrook was nodding with grudging approval. "Mrs. Garcia was right about you," he admitted. "I can offer $3 a week to start. Hours are 8 to 6 with Sundays off. You'll handle the books, help customers when we're busy, and keep the shelves organized." It was less than she would have made teaching, but it was a start. "Thank you, Mr. Holbrook." "When would you like me to begin?" "Tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As Violet left the store, a sense of accomplishment warmed her despite the meager salary. She had work, a temporary place to stay, and the beginnings of a plan. Santa Fe had been a dream, but perhaps Old Tucson could become something more substantial. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with someone on the boardwalk. "Whoa there," said a familiar voice as strong hands steadied her by the shoulders. "You're moving like a woman with good news." Violet looked up to find Wade Andrews smiling down at her, his hat tipped back to reveal those striking blue eyes. "Mr. Andrews." She stepped back, suddenly conscious of his hands on her shoulders. "Yes, actually. Mr. Holbrook has offered me a position at the Mercantile." "Did he now?" "That old skinflint must have been impressed. He hasn't hired anyone new in 3 years." Wade fell into step beside her as she continued down the boardwalk. "Will you be staying in Old Tucson, then? For now, at least, Mrs. Garcia has offered to let me stay at the boarding house until I find more permanent lodgings." Violet glanced at him. "I should thank you for directing me there last night." "No need for thanks. Mrs. Garcia has a soft spot for strays. I was one myself when I first came to the territory." "You don't strike me as a stray, Mr. Andrews," he chuckled softly. "7 years ago, I was greener than spring grass. Came out from Missouri thinking I'd strike it rich in the silver mines. Ended up broke and hungry." He paused at the corner where the street led toward the outskirts of town. "The Garcias gave me a job mucking out their stable in exchange for meals, until I found work with old Henry Wilcox learning the cattle business." "And now you have your own ranch," Violet observed. "The Circle A. It's small compared to some, but it's mine." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "Paid the last note to the bank 6 months ago. That's quite an accomplishment," Wade shrugged. "Just takes work and a bit of luck." He glanced down the street toward the livery. "I should get going. I've got supplies to pick up before I head back." "Of course." Violet was surprised to find herself reluctant to end the conversation. "Thank you again for yesterday, Miss Brenner," he said, tipping his hat. "I have a feeling you'd have found your way regardless, but I'm glad our paths crossed." As he walked away, Violet found herself watching him longer than propriety might dictate. There was something refreshingly direct about Wade Andrews' no pretense, no airs, just honest communication. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new routines. Violet quickly mastered the inventory system at Holbrook's, streamlining the bookkeeping and introducing a more efficient method of tracking stock. Mr. Holbrook, initially skeptical of her fancy Eastern ideas, gradually came to appreciate her organizational skills. She continued to stay at the Garcia's boarding house, working in the kitchen before and after her shifts at the mercantile to help offset the cost of her room and board. In the evenings, she began tutoring the Garcia's youngest grandchildren in reading and arithmetic. Word spread, and soon 3 other families approached her about lessons for their children. The small town began to feel less foreign as Violet learned its rhythms and inhabitants. She came to know Sheriff Cooper, who stopped by the mercantile each morning for tobacco, Mrs. Pendleton, who ran the millinery and gossiped incessantly, Doc Miller, whose kind eyes belied his gruff manner, and dozens of others who made up the fabric of Old Tucson. Of Wade Andrews, however, she saw little. He appeared in town only once that fortnight, stopping briefly at the mercantile for supplies. Their exchange had been pleasant but brief, with Violet busy serving other customers. She told herself it was foolish to feel disappointed. On a warm Saturday afternoon, as Violet was arranging a new shipment of canned goods on the shelves, the bell above the door jangled. She turned to find Wade entering, looking somewhat more polished than usual in a clean shirt and vest, his boots freshly oiled. "Miss Brenner," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You're looking well. Old Tucson seems to agree with you." Indeed, the past weeks had brought color to her cheeks and a new confidence to her bearing. "Mr. Andrews, what brings you to town today?" "Bringing cattle in to ship east," he replied. "And I came to ask a favor if you're amenable." Curious, Violet set down the can she was holding. "What sort of favor?" "There's a social at the Masons' Hall tonight. Dancing, food, that sort of thing." He twirled his hat in his hands, a gesture that suggested uncharacteristic nervousness. "I wondered if you might consider accompanying me." Violet blinked in surprise. "A social?" "Yes, madam. Nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering. Mrs. Garcia mentioned you might enjoy the music, and he cleared his throat. "I'd be honored to escort you." The invitation caught Violet entirely off guard. She hadn't packed for social occasions, and her best dress was hardly suitable for dancing. And yet, the prospect of an evening away from ledgers and lessons was undeniably appealing. "That's very kind, Mr. Andrews, but I'm afraid I don't have if you're worried about having nothing to wear," came Mrs. Pendleton's voice from behind a display of ribbons, where she'd obviously been eavesdropping. "I have just the thing. A lovely blue dress came in last week that would suit your coloring perfectly." Wade suppressed a smile at the interruption. "Seems the town wants you at the social, Miss Brenner." Violet felt herself blushing. "Well, I suppose I could attend then." "I'll call for you at 7, Wade said, settling his hat back on his head. The smile he gave her before departing left Violet with a curious flutter in her stomach that she attributed to the unexpected turn of events. Mrs. Pendleton emerged fully from behind the ribbon display. "Well now, let's discuss that dress. I close at 5, which gives us plenty of time for adjustments." That evening, as Mrs. Garcia helped her pin the final strands of her hair into place, Violet barely recognized her reflection in the small mirror. The dress Mrs. Pendleton had provided was indeed perfect, a cornflower blue that brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, with a modest neckline and sleeves that ended just below the elbow. "He won't be able to take his eyes off you," Mrs. Garcia said with satisfaction. "Mr. Andrews is simply being kind to a newcomer," Violet protested weakly. Mrs. Garcia snorted. "That man hasn't escorted anyone to a social in the 3 years since Sarah Johnson left him for that railroad man. He's being more than kind, child." This revelation gave Violet pause. "I didn't know he had been involved with someone." "It's not my story to tell," Mrs. Garcia said firmly, "but know that Wade Andrews doesn't offer his arm lightly." A knock at the front door ended further conversation. Mrs. Garcia gave Violet's hair one last pat before bustling out to answer it. Wade stood in the doorway, looking almost transformed in his dark suit coat and string tie, his usually unruly hair tamed with water. He held his hat in his hands, and for a moment, as Violet descended the stairs, neither of them seemed to know what to say. "Miss Brenner," he finally managed, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied softly. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Andrews." Mrs. Garcia thrust a shawl into Violet's hands. "It gets cool at night. Don't stay out too late, you two." The Masons' Hall was only a short walk away, and the spring evening was pleasant. Violet was acutely aware of Wade's arm beneath her hand as he escorted her along the boardwalk. "I should warn you," he said as they approached the hall, from which fiddle music already emanated. "Folks around here dance with enthusiasm if not always skill." "I'm sure it will be delightful," Violet replied. "Though I should warn you that my own dancing might be a bit formal for frontier tastes." Wade grinned. "We'll muddle through together then." The hall was transformed with lanterns and bunting, tables laden with food along one wall, and a small stage where 3 musicians played with gusto. It seemed half the town was already there, and Violet found herself being introduced to more people than she could possibly remember. They danced first to a lively reel that left Violet breathless and laughing as Wade guided her through unfamiliar steps. Then came a waltz where his hand rested properly at her waist, his touch light but secure as they moved around the floor. "You're quite good at this," she remarked, surprised by his grace. "My mother insisted all her boys learn to dance properly," he replied. "Said no son of hers would stomp around like a buffalo. She sounds like a woman of strong opinions." That she was. A shadow passed briefly across his face. "She passed 5 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry." Violet's own loss of her father was still a tender wound. "It's not easy losing parents." "No, it isn't," Wade's eyes met hers with understanding. Mrs. Garcia mentioned you lost your father recently. Last winter. It was why I came west. Our home in Boston went to pay his debts, and I had an opportunity in Santa Fe. She gave a rueful smile. Or so I thought. Santa Fe's loss is our gain, Wade said simply. They continued dancing, conversation flowing easily between them. Violet found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Boston, of her father's work as a professor of literature, of her own dreams of teaching. Wade spoke of his 3 older brothers who had all settled in California, of learning ranching through trial and error, of the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. As the evening progressed, Violet became aware of curious glances and whispered comments from the townsfolk. Clearly, Wade Andrews escorting someone to a social was noteworthy. During a break in the dancing, as they enjoyed apple cider and Mrs. Cooper's famous peach pie, Violet gathered her courage to broach the subject Mrs. Garcia had mentioned. I get the impression you don't usually attend these gatherings, she said carefully. Wade took a sip of cider before answering. Not for a while, no. May I ask why? He set his cup down, considering her question. 3 years ago, I was engaged to marry Sarah Johnson, the previous schoolteacher. 2 weeks before the wedding, she left with a railroad surveyor who promised her a fine house in San Francisco. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Violet could sense the old hurt beneath it. After that, socials seemed less appealing. I'm sorry, Violet said softly. That must have been painful. It was, he acknowledged. But time passes, and sometimes. His eyes met hers. Sometimes you meet someone who makes you want to try again. The directness of his gaze sent warmth spreading through Violet's chest. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by Mr. Holbrook, who wanted to introduce Violet to his sister visiting from Phoenix. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of dancing and conversation. By the time Wade escorted her back to the boarding house, Violet's feet ached pleasantly and her cheeks hurt from smiling. They paused on the porch, the soft glow from the window illuminating their faces. Thank you for accompanying me tonight, Miss Brenner, Wade said, still holding her hand from when he'd helped her up the steps. Thank you for asking me, Mr. Andrews. Violet knew she should withdraw her hand, but found herself reluctant to do so. I enjoyed myself tremendously. Enough to consider doing it again. His voice held a note of hope that made her heart quicken. I think I might be persuaded, she replied with a small smile. Wade lifted her hand and with old-fashioned courtesy pressed a brief kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Miss Brenner. Good night, Mr. Andrews. As Violet watched him walk away down the moonlit street, she realized with a mixture of excitement and trepidation that Wade Andrews was becoming far more than just the kind stranger who had offered company outside the mercantile. The weeks that followed saw a gradual but undeniable shift in Violet's life in Old Tucson. Her position at Holbrook's became more secure as the mercantile's accounts improved under her management. Her tutoring expanded to 8 children who gathered 3 evenings a week in Mrs. Garcia's dining room after the supper dishes were cleared. And most significantly, her friendship with Wade Andrews deepened into something neither of them openly acknowledged but both clearly felt. Wade began finding reasons to come to town more frequently than his ranch business strictly required. He would appear at the mercantile for small purchases, lingering to chat with Violet when business was slow. On Sundays after church, he often invited her for walks along the creek that ran behind the town, where they would talk for hours about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they harbored. By early summer, it was widely assumed in town that Wade Andrews was courting Violet Brenner, though neither had put a formal name to their relationship. Violet found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. She had come west seeking independence, not attachment, and yet she couldn't deny the joy she felt in Wade's company. June brought scorching heat to the Arizona territory. Inside the mercantile, Violet worked with the ledger, occasionally wiping her brow with a handkerchief. Mr. Holbrook had gone home for his midday meal, leaving her to mind the store during the quietest hours of the day. The bell jangled, and Violet looked up expecting to see Mrs. Pendleton, who often stopped by to chat during this time. Instead, 3 dust-covered men entered, their spurs jingling against the wooden floor. Something about their demeanor immediately put Violet on alert, the way their eyes darted around the store, assessing rather than shopping. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, keeping her voice steady. "How may I help you today?" The tallest of the 3 approached the counter, removing his hat to reveal greasy black hair and a face marred by a long scar across one cheek. "Afternoon, miss. Fine establishment you got here." "Thank you. Mr. Holbrook takes pride in his store." Violet's hands remained steady on the ledger, though her heart had begun to race. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" The man smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Oh, we're looking for something specific, all right." He glanced at his companions, who had positioned themselves near the door. The money box would do nicely. Violet's throat went dry, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm afraid Mr. Holbrook keeps very little cash on the premises. Most transactions are by credit or barter." "Now I find that hard to believe." The man's friendly demeanor vanished. Saturday was payday at the mine. Folks would have been in here spending. That box under the counter, open it. Violet's mind raced. He was right, the box contained nearly $80, the weekend's receipts that Mr. Holbrook had planned to deposit at the bank later that afternoon. "The sheriff makes his rounds at 1 o'clock, she said, hoping to dissuade them. "He should be by any minute." "Then we'd best be quick about it." The man's hand moved to his hip where a revolver sat holstered. "The box, miss. Now." With trembling fingers, Violet reached beneath the counter for the metal cash box. As she set it on the counter, the bell above the door jangled again. All eyes turned to see Wade Andrews standing in the doorway, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "Seems I'm interrupting something," he said mildly, though Violet could see the tension in his shoulders. "Just conducting some business," the scarred man replied, his hand still hovering near his gun. "Nothing that concerns you, Cowboy." Wade stepped further into the store, seemingly casual but positioning himself with a clear line of sight to all 3 men. "Miss Brenner, is everything all right?" "These gentlemen were just leaving," Violet said, her voice steadier than she felt. The scarred man laughed. "Not without that box, we ain't." He turned to Wade. "Walk back out that door, mister, and you won't get hurt." Wade's eyes met Violet's for a brief moment, conveying a silent message. Then he shrugged. "Seems like poor business robbing the only mercantile for miles. Where will you buy supplies after this?" "That ain't our problem," one of the other men said. "No, but it might be a problem for Sheriff Cooper," Wade replied. "And for the 12 ranch hands from the circle who are unloading supplies across the street right now." Violet knew this was a bluff. Wade had come to town alone, but the conviction in his voice made even her almost believe it. The scarred man hesitated, glancing toward the window. In that moment of distraction, Wade moved with surprising speed. He closed the distance to the nearest robber, driving a fist into the man's stomach before shoving him hard into his companion. The scarred man drew his gun, but Violet was already moving. She grabbed the heavy ledger and swung it with all her strength, catching him across the face. He staggered backward, the gun discharging into the ceiling as he fell. Wade had the other 2 men on the floor now, one unconscious from a blow to the head, the other struggling beneath Wade's knee pressed into his back. The commotion brought townsfolk running. Within minutes, Sheriff Cooper arrived, taking in the scene with a whistle of surprise. "Seems you've had some excitement, Miss Brenner," he said as he handcuffed the dazed leader. "More than I care for," Violet replied, realizing her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. Wade came to stand beside her, his knuckles bloodied but his expression concerned only for her. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, thanks to you." She looked up at him with newfound appreciation. That was either very brave or very foolish. "Bit of both, probably," he admitted with a rueful smile. "When I saw them in here with you," his voice hardened, "I couldn't just walk away." As Sheriff Cooper and several volunteers escorted the would-be robbers to the jail, Mr. Holbrook returned, aghast at what had transpired in his absence. "Miss Brenner, Mr. Andrews, good heavens, are you both all right?" "We're fine," Violet assured him. "The money is safe." "Hang the money," Mr. Holbrook said with uncharacteristic emotion. "You could have been killed." "But we weren't," Wade said firmly. "Though I think Miss Brenner might need a moment to collect herself." Mr. Holbrook nodded vigorously. Of course. Take the rest of the day, my dear." After such an ordeal, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing work, Violet found herself being escorted out of the store by Wade, who insisted on taking her to Mrs. Garcia's for a restorative cup of tea. As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, Wade kept his hand at her elbow, his touch a comforting anchor after the frightening encounter. "You were remarkable in there," he said quietly. "Most people would have frozen up entirely." "I was terrified," Violet admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear," Wade replied. "It's about acting despite it." At the boarding house, Mrs. Garcia fussed over them both, applying witch hazel to Wade's bruised knuckles and pressing sweet tea and biscuits upon them. News of the attempted robbery spread through town with lightning speed, and by evening, Violet found herself something of a local hero, a role that sat uncomfortably with her. After supper, Wade suggested a walk to escape the well-meaning but overwhelming attention. They strolled toward the creek, the setting sun painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "I keep thinking about what might have happened," Violet said as they reached the bank where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade. "If you hadn't come in when you did." "But I did," Wade said simply. "And you were handling yourself quite well before I arrived." Violet laughed softly. "I don't think hitting a man with a ledger book qualifies as handling myself well." "It was effective." Wade's expression grew serious. "When I walked in and saw you there with those men, I've never been so frightened in my life." The admission surprised her. "You didn't look frightened." "I'm good at hiding it." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Violet, today made me realize something I think I've known for weeks now." Her heart quickened at his use of her first name. "What's that?" "That I care for you, more than I thought possible after." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "I came to town today to ask if you'd consider coming out to the ranch on Sunday. Meet my foreman and his wife. See the place I've built." The invitation was significant, a formal acknowledgement of his intentions, a step toward something more defined than their casual walks and conversations. Violet looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, open and honest in the fading light. "I'd like that very much, Wade." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the horizon. With careful deliberation, he leaned forward and placed a tender kiss on her lips, brief, respectful, but filled with promise. As they walked back to town in companionable silence, Violet reflected on how drastically her life had changed since that day she'd sat alone outside the mercantile. The teaching position in Santa Fe now seemed like a distant dream belonging to someone else. Here in Old Tucson, she had found not just work and community, but something she hadn't even known she was seeking. Sunday dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that kept the heat from becoming oppressive. Violet dressed with particular care in her blue calico dress, the nicest of her limited wardrobe. Mrs. Garcia had helped her add some simple embroidery to the collar and cuffs, elevating it from practical to pretty. Wade arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, driving a well-maintained buckboard wagon rather than riding horseback as he usually did. He had dressed in his Sunday best, the same dark suit he'd worn to the social, with a fresh white shirt and string tie. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her up onto the seat. "Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself." The compliment came easier now, their relationship having shifted subtly since the attempted robbery and that tender kiss by the creek. The journey to the circle took nearly an hour, following a winding trail that led away from town and into rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear cactus. As they traveled, Wade pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land. "That ridge there marks the northern boundary of the ranch," he explained as they crested a small hill. "And down there, see that line of cottonwoods? That's Wolf Creek, runs year-round, which is why this land is so valuable." "It's beautiful," Violet said, taking in the expansive landscape. "So different from what I was used to in Boston. Too open for you?" There was a hint of concern in his voice. "No," she replied thoughtfully, "just different. There's a freedom in all this space, room to breathe, room to become whoever you want to be." Wade's smile told her he understood exactly what she meant. The ranch house came into view as they rounded a bend in the trail, a substantial structure built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, a corral held horses that raised their heads at the approaching wagon. "It's not fancy," Wade said with a touch of self-consciousness, "but it's solid. Built it myself with help from the hands." "It's wonderful," Violet said sincerely. The house spoke of care and craftsmanship, practical but with touches of beauty in the carved porch posts and the flowering vines trained up one wall. As they pulled up to the hitching post, a middle-aged couple emerged from the house. The man was tall and weathered, with salt and pepper hair and a bushy mustache. The woman beside him was plump and pleasant-looking, her graying hair tucked neatly beneath a kerchief. "Miss Brenner, this is Tom Fletcher, my foreman, and his wife Martha," Wade said as he helped Violet down from the wagon. "Tom, Martha, this is Miss Violet Brenner." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Brenner," Tom said, touching the brim of his hat. "Boss has told us plenty about you." "All good things, I hope," Violet replied with a smile. "Oh, honey, he hasn't stopped talking about you for weeks," Martha said warmly, ignoring Wade's embarrassed cough. "Come inside. Dinner's almost ready." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace along one wall, a sturdy table with 6 chairs, and several well-worn but clean armchairs grouped near the hearth. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that made Violet's heart leap with pleasure. Wade was clearly a reader. Martha had prepared a feast: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and early summer vegetables from her kitchen garden. The conversation flowed easily as they ate, Tom sharing amusing stories about ranch life and Martha asking Violet about her teaching experience. After the meal, Martha insisted on showing Violet her garden and henhouse, while Wade and Tom discussed some ranch business. The older woman's friendliness was genuine, and Violet found herself warming to her immediately. "He's different since he met you," Martha said as they admired the neat rows of vegetables. "Lighter somehow. After that business with Sarah Johnson, we worried he'd never open up again. I've heard bits of that story, Violet said carefully. Martha nodded. Broke his heart, that one did. Had the wedding all planned, dresses made, food ordered, then up and left with barely a note. Wade never spoke of it, just threw himself into building this place. She patted Violet's arm. But that's the past. The way he looks at you, that's the future. When they returned to the house, Wade suggested showing Violet the rest of the ranch. Tom brought around 2 saddled horses, and despite Violet's admission that her riding skills were rudimentary at best, Wade helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy. "Just hold the reins loosely and let her follow my horse," he instructed. "She knows the trails better than most humans." They rode at a leisurely pace, Wade pointing out the boundaries of the property, the spring-fed creek that provided water even in the driest months, the canyon where he planned to build a lined shack for the hands during winter roundups. Everywhere Violet looked, she saw evidence of careful planning and hard work: fences maintained, water channels cleared, healthy cattle grazing on good grass. "You've built something remarkable here," she said as they paused atop a small rise overlooking the ranch house in the distance. "All on your own." "Not entirely on my own," Wade corrected. "I've had good help, but yes, it's been my dream since I first saw this land." He hesitated, then added, "Though lately I've been thinking the dream isn't complete. What's missing?" Violet asked, though something in his expression made her suspect she knew the answer. "A partner," he said simply. "Someone to share it with, to build a future with." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Violet's heart raced as Wade guided his horse closer to hers. "I know it's soon," he continued. "You came west for independence, not to tie yourself to a rancher you've known only a few months. But I want you to know that my intentions are serious, Violet. I care for you deeply." "I care for you too," she replied softly. "More than I expected to. More than I planned for." "Life rarely follows our plans," Wade said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes it offers something better instead." They returned to the ranch house as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Martha had prepared a picnic basket for their return journey, pressing it into Violet's hands with a warm embrace that felt like acceptance. As they drove back toward town, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape, Violet found herself imagining a life here: mornings waking to the sound of birds rather than the boarding house's breakfast clatter, evenings spent reading by lamplight in those comfortable chairs, perhaps children someday running across the porch Wade had built with his own hands. The vision was both thrilling and terrifying. She had come west seeking independence, not domesticity. And yet, was there not freedom in choosing one's own path, even if that path led to partnership rather than solitude? "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, noticing her thoughtful silence. "About choices," she replied honestly. "About how the road we think we're taking can lead somewhere entirely unexpected." Wade's hand found hers on the seat between them. "Any regrets about where your road has led so far?" Violet turned to look at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "None," she said with certainty. "Not a single one." The weeks that followed Violet's visit to the circle brought both joy and challenges. Word spread through Old Tucson that Wade Andrews was seriously courting the Eastern Lady, as some still called her, despite her growing integration into the community. Most reactions were positive. Wade was well respected, and Violet had earned her own place through her work at the Mercantile and her teaching. Not everyone approved, however. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah's mother, made pointed comments about flighty Eastern girls within Violet's hearing at church. Mr. Holbrook, while supportive of Violet personally, grumbled about losing his best employee to marriage and motherhood, a presumption that made Violet bristle despite her deepening feelings for Wade. In July, a heat wave descended on the territory, bringing temperatures that made the mercantile feel like an oven despite the canvas awnings Mr. Holbrook installed over the windows. Business slowed to a crawl as people stayed home during the hottest hours, venturing out only in early morning or evening. It was during this scorching period that trouble came to the Circle A. Wade arrived in town one evening, his expression grave as he asked Violet to walk with him after she finished work. "What's wrong?" she asked as soon as they were alone, strolling toward the creek where the air was marginally cooler. "Someone's been cutting my fences," Wade replied, his voice tight with suppressed anger. 3 sections in the past week, and day before yesterday we found one of our breeding bulls dead shot, not rustled." Violet gasped. "Who would do such a thing? I have my suspicions." Wade picked up a stone and skipped it across the shallow creek. "The Hargrove outfit has been trying to buy my water rights for 2 years. Old man Hargrove doesn't like being told no. Surely he wouldn't resort to destruction of property." "Men like Hargrove believe they're entitled to whatever they want." Wade's jaw tightened. "His son Ethan is worse, hot-headed, used to getting his way. Have you spoken to Sheriff Cooper this morning? He'll ride out but without catching someone in the act." Wade shrugged. "We'll increase patrols along the boundary. Tom's organizing the hands to ride in pairs." Violet laid her hand on his arm. "Be careful, property can be repaired, but you—" She couldn't finish the thought. Wade covered her hand with his own. "I'm always careful." His expression softened. "I have too much to look forward to now." The following Sunday, as Violet sat with Mrs. Garcia in church waiting for the service to begin, she noticed a commotion at the entrance. Wade entered, his face bearing a fresh bruise along his jawline. Behind him came Tom Fletcher, supporting a younger ranch hand whose arm was in a makeshift sling. Violet rose immediately, meeting Wade halfway down the aisle. "What happened?" she asked, reaching up instinctively to touch the discoloration on his face. "Caught Ethan Hargrove and 2 of his men cutting fence last night," Wade replied in a low voice. They didn't take kindly to being interrupted. Before Violet could respond, a loud voice boomed from the church entrance. "Andrews, you had no right to rough up my boy." All heads turned to see Clayton Hargrove, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a florid face and expensive clothes that marked him as one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. Behind him stood a younger man with a face far more battered than Wade's, one eye swollen shut, nose clearly broken. "Your boy is 30 years old and was destroying my property," Wade replied evenly, turning to face the newcomer. "He's lucky I didn't shoot him." "This is a house of God," Reverend Phillips intervened, stepping between the men. "Whatever dispute you have can be settled elsewhere." "There's nothing to settle," Wade said. "Sheriff Cooper has the facts. Hargrove men were caught in the act of vandalism. It's a legal matter now." Clayton Hargrove's face darkened further. "You'll regret this, Andrews. Nobody crosses me in this territory." "That's enough, Clayton," came another voice, Sheriff Cooper's, who had been sitting near the front. "Your son's already facing charges. Don't add threatening behavior to the list." With a final glare, Hargrove stormed out, pulling his son with him. A murmur of conversation rippled through the congregation as Reverend Phillips tried to restore order. "Perhaps we should all remember today's sermon topic, loving thy neighbor," the Reverend said with a pointed look at the departing Hargroves. As Wade took a seat beside Violet, she could feel the tension radiating from him. Throughout the service, he sat rigidly, his thoughts clearly elsewhere despite his efforts to focus on the hymns and prayers. After church, as the congregation spilled out into the hot July sunshine, Sheriff Cooper approached them. "Wade, a word." The lawman led them a few paces away from the dispersing crowd. "Hargrove's making noise about pressing charges against you for assaulting his son." "That's absurd," Violet protested. "Wade was defending his property." Cooper nodded. "I know that, and any judge worth his salt would throw out Hargrove's complaint, but Clayton has friends in the territorial government. He could make things difficult." "What are you suggesting?" Wade asked. "Just be careful. Don't give him any excuse to escalate this." Cooper adjusted his hat. "I'll be increasing patrols near your boundary line for the next few weeks." As they walked toward Mrs. Garcia's for the Sunday meal, Wade was uncharacteristically silent. Violet could see the worry in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "What are you thinking?" Wade sighed. "I'm thinking that Hargrove won't let this go. He's used to getting his way, and I've embarrassed his son publicly. Surely he wouldn't risk breaking the law again. Men like Hargrove don't think the law applies to them." Wade stopped walking, turning to face her. "Violet, I need to ask something of you, and I hate that I have to." "Anything," she replied without hesitation. "Be extra cautious. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it, especially after dark." His eyes held hers intently. "Hargrove might look for indirect ways to strike back at me." The implication sent a chill through Violet despite the summer heat. "You think he would target me to hurt you?" "I think he's vindictive enough to consider it." Wade's hand reached for hers. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen," Violet assured him, though the confidence in her voice exceeded what she felt. "And if it did, it wouldn't be because of you. It would be because of Hargrove's actions, not yours." Wade's expression softened with gratitude for her understanding. "You're remarkable, you know that." "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile, trying to lighten his mood. "Usually by a certain rancher who seems quite biased in my favor." Her attempt at humor worked. Wade's stance relaxed slightly. "Guilty as charged." That evening, as Violet sat on the boarding house porch enjoying the relative cool of twilight, Mrs. Garcia joined her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've got a good man there," the older woman said, nodding toward the direction Wade had gone when he'd left after dinner. "One who thinks of your safety before his pride." "I'm worried about him," Violet admitted. "This conflict with Hargrove seems dangerous." "It is." Mrs. Garcia didn't sugarcoat the truth. "Clayton Hargrove has been the big fish in our small pond for 20 years. He's not used to being challenged." She sipped her lemonade thoughtfully. "But Wade isn't one to back down when he's in the right, and that land, it means everything to him." "I know." And she did. Violet had seen the pride in Wade's eyes when he showed her the ranch, the careful way he spoke of the future he was building there. It wasn't just property to him. It was a dream made tangible. "Almost everything," Mrs. Garcia amended with a knowing look. "These past months, I've seen his priorities shift a bit." Violet felt her cheeks warm, but before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Tom Fletcher appeared on a lathered horse, pulling up sharply at the boarding house gate. "Miss Brenner," he called, dismounting quickly. "Is Wade still here?" "He left about 20 minutes ago," Violet replied, rising in alarm at Tom's obvious distress. "What's happened?" "Fire at the south pasture," Tom said grimly. "Someone set the dry grass burning near the creek. We've got the hands fighting it, but with this drought." He shook his head. "Could lose the whole summer grazing if we don't get it contained." "He was heading to the livery to get his horse," Violet said. "You might catch him there." Tom nodded, remounting quickly. "Madam, might be best if Wade doesn't ride back alone tonight. Hargrove men were seen near town earlier." As Tom galloped away, Violet exchanged a worried look with Mrs. Garcia. "I should go with him," Violet said, already moving toward the door to get her shawl. "You'll do no such thing, Mrs. Garcia replied firmly. A wildfire is no place for someone without experience. You'd only be one more person for them to worry about. Logically, Violet knew the older woman was right, but the thought of Wade facing both fire and potential ambush made her heart clench with fear. Then I'll wait up, she decided, until I know he's safe. It was the longest night of Violet's life. She sat by the window in the boarding house parlor, watching the road into town, while Mrs. Garcia dozed in a chair nearby, refusing to leave her alone. Sometime after midnight, the faint glow of flames could be seen in the distance, backlighting the hills to the south. Dawn was breaking when hoofbeats finally sounded on the street. Violet rushed to the door to see Wade dismounting from his exhausted horse, his face and clothes blackened with soot, his movements slow with fatigue. Wade! She hurried down the steps, heedless of propriety or her undressed state in just her robe over her nightgown. He looked up at her voice, relief washing over his smoke-smudged face. Violet, you shouldn't be out here like this. Never mind that. Are you hurt? She reached him just as Mrs. Garcia appeared on the porch. Just tired. We managed to contain the fire before it reached the main pastures. He swayed slightly, and Violet quickly moved to support him, slipping under his arm. Lost about 40 acres of grazing land, but it could have been much worse. Mrs. Garcia was already holding the door open. Bring him inside. I'll heat water for washing and make coffee. In the parlor, Wade sank into a chair while Violet poured him a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table. He drank it gratefully, his hand trembling slightly with exhaustion. Was anyone hurt? She asked, taking the empty glass from him. No, thank God. One of the hands spotted the fire early enough for us to rally. Wade's eyes held a mixture of anger and resignation. It was deliberate. Violet found coal oil cans at 3 different starting points. Hargrove, she said, not a question but a certainty. Wade nodded grimly. No proof, of course. But who else? Mrs. Garcia returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a cup of strong coffee. Clean up, then rest, she ordered. The mercantile can survive without Miss Brenner for one morning. Despite Violet's protests that she was perfectly capable of going to work, Mrs. Garcia was adamant. You haven't slept all night, and I'll not have you collapsing among the dry goods. Mr. Holbrook will understand. As it happened, Mr. Holbrook did more than understand. When Mrs. Garcia sent word of the situation, he closed the store entirely for the morning, arriving at the boarding house with Sheriff Cooper and several other business owners for an impromptu meeting. This has gone beyond simple rivalry, Cooper said, after Wade had related the events of the night. Destruction of property, attempted arson, these are serious crimes. But without witnesses, Wade began. We all know who's behind it, said Mr. Jensen, who ran the livery. Hargrove's been throwing his weight around too long. Knowing and proving are different matters, Cooper replied. But I've wired the territorial marshal. This is bigger than my jurisdiction now. Mr. Holbrook cleared his throat. In the meantime, I propose we organize a town watch. Take turns patrolling, especially at night. And someone should stay at the circle when Wade's not there, added Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith. I'd volunteer my boys. They're good shots and level-headed. Violet watched in amazement as the town rallied around Wade. These men, many of whom she'd initially found reserved or even suspicious of her eastern ways, now demonstrated the true spirit of frontier community, offering protection and support without hesitation. Wade seemed equally moved. I don't know what to say except thank you, all of you. No need for thanks, Mr. Jensen said gruffly. You do the same for any of us. As the men worked out a schedule for patrols and support, Violet found herself drawn into conversation with Mrs. Holbrook, who had arrived with fresh bread and preserves. "It's a difficult situation," the older woman said quietly. "But I've seen the way Wade looks at you, dear. Some things are worth fighting for." By afternoon, Wade had gotten a few hours of rest and was preparing to return to the ranch. Violet walked with him to the livery, where Mr. Jensen had insisted on providing him with a fresh horse while his own recovered. "I wish you didn't have to go back right away," Violet said as they paused outside the stable. "I need to be there," Wade replied. "The hands are exhausted and we've got repairs to make before dark." His hand found hers. "But I'll be careful, I promise." "See that you are." She squeezed his fingers. "I have plans that require your continued well-being, Mr. Andrews." A smile broke through the weariness on his face. "Is that so, Miss Brenner? And what might those plans entail?" "That," she said with deliberate lightness, "is for me to know and you to wonder about while you're mending fences." Wade laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him in days. Then, heedless of who might be watching on the busy street, he bent and kissed her, not the gentle, brief kiss of their earlier encounters, but something deeper, more urgent. When they parted, both slightly breathless, he touched her cheek gently. "Something to remember me by until I return." "As if I could forget," she murmured, blushing at her own boldness. Wade mounted the borrowed horse, tipping his hat to her before riding out of town. Violet watched until he disappeared from view, a mixture of worry and determination settling in her chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The following weeks brought an uneasy calm to Old Tucson. The territorial marshal arrived, a stern-faced man named Blackwell who interviewed witnesses and inspected the damage at the circle with methodical thoroughness. While he made no public pronouncements, the fact that he spent several hours at the Hargrove Ranch sent a clear message. Clayton Hargrove, perhaps sensing the shift in official attention, withdrew to his property. His son Ethan was conspicuously absent from town, rumored to have been sent to relatives in Texas, until the situation cooled. For Violet, life settled into a new pattern. She continued her work at the mercantile and her teaching, but now Wade made a point of escorting her whenever possible. When ranch duties kept him away, one of the town watch would appear casually nearby as she walked home or to the creek for her Sunday reading. At first, Violet found the constant protection stifling. She had come west seeking independence after all. But a frank conversation with Mrs. Garcia helped shift her perspective. "It's not about controlling you," the older woman said as they shelled peas on the porch one evening. "It's about community. We look out for each other here because we have to. No one survives the frontier alone." By August, the heat wave broke, bringing blessed relief, and even a few scattered thunderstorms that temporarily greened the parched landscape. Wade's ranch recovered slowly from the fire damage, with neighbors helping to clear burned areas and rebuild fences. On a pleasant Saturday evening, Wade invited Violet to dinner at the one restaurant in town, a small establishment run by a French-Canadian trapper who had decided cooking was less dangerous than fur trading. It was as close to fine dining as Old Tucson offered, with actual tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Wade had dressed in his best suit again, and seemed unusually nervous as they were seated at the corner table. He ordered wine, a luxury rarely seen in town, and fidgeted with his napkin as they waited for their food. "Is everything all right?" Violet finally asked. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking," he replied, then smiled ruefully. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I'm working up my courage." Courage? Wade Andrews, who faced down 3 armed fence cutters and a wildfire, needs courage for dinner. His laugh relaxed some of the tension. Different kind of courage entirely. He reached into his pocket and placed a small wooden box on the table between them. "This kind." Violet's heart began to race as she stared at the box. Wade, I carved it myself, he said, nudging it toward her. Go ahead. With slightly trembling fingers, Violet opened the box. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl set between two tiny blue stones. It's not fancy, Wade said, echoing the words he'd used about his ranch house. But it's solid, like what I feel for you. It's beautiful, Violet whispered, unable to take her eyes off it. Wade reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. Violet Brenner, I know you came west seeking independence. I know partnership wasn't in your plans, but sometimes life offers us something we didn't know we were looking for. He took a deep breath. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Violet thought of the young woman who had sat alone outside the mercantile just 4 months ago, defeated and uncertain. She thought of the life she had begun to build here, not the one she had planned, but perhaps the one she was meant to find. Yes, she said, her voice strong and certain. Yes, I will. Wade's face lit with joy as he rose, coming around the table to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. The other diners, who had fallen silent during Wade's proposal, burst into applause. Violet blushed as she realized they had an audience, but the genuine good wishes called out from neighboring tables warmed her heart. This town, this community had become hers in ways she hadn't anticipated. As Wade returned to his seat, now grinning broadly, the restaurant door opened. Sheriff Cooper entered, his expression serious as he scanned the room. When his eyes fell on their table, he approached quickly. Wade, Miss Brenner, sorry to interrupt your evening. What's happened? Wade asked, immediately alert. Marshal Blackwell just received word from Fort Bowie. Clayton Hargrove was arrested trying to bribe an Army quartermaster to testify that you sold stolen cattle to the fort. Violet gasped. That's absurd. Wade would never. Of course it's absurd, Cooper agreed. And Blackwell knows it, but it shows how desperate Hargrove is getting. He glanced around at the other diners who were pretending not to listen. I'd like you both to come to my office. There are some developments you should know about. At the sheriff's office, they found Marshal Blackwell studying a map spread across Cooper's desk. He nodded briefly at their entrance. Mr. Andrews, Miss Brenner, apologies for disrupting your evening, but this couldn't wait. His finger traced a line on the map. We've received intelligence that suggests Hargrove isn't just after your water rights, Andrews. It appears the Union Pacific is considering a spur line through this territory, and early surveys indicate the most viable route would cut right through the southern portion of your land. Wade's expression cleared with sudden understanding. So that's it. Hargrove wants my land for the railroad. The potential profit would be substantial, Blackwell confirmed. Wherever the railroad goes, development follows. Land values increase tenfold overnight. How did Hargrove even know about the railroad plans? Violet asked. I haven't heard anything about this in town. His cousin sits on the territorial legislature, Cooper explained. Privileged information. Wade shook his head in disgust. All this, the fence cutting, the fire, the threats over money he doesn't even need. Hargrove already has the largest spread in the county. Some men are never satisfied with what they have, Blackwell said grimly. They always want more. What happens now? Violet asked. With Hargrove arrested. He won't stay arrested long, Blackwell cautioned. Attempted bribery is serious, but his lawyers will have him out on bail by morning. However, this gives us leverage. Between this charge and the evidence we've been gathering about the vandalism at the Circle A, Hargrove is facing significant legal troubles. He's also facing social ruin, Cooper added. Word of this will spread. His standing in the territory will never be the same. Wade was silent for a moment, considering this information. "I want this to end," he finally said. "Not just for me, but for Violet, for my ranch hands who have been riding double patrols for weeks, for the town that's rallied around us." He looked at Blackwell. "What would it take?" The marshal studied him. "Are you suggesting a settlement?" "I'm suggesting a resolution," Wade clarified. "One that doesn't involve months of legal battles and potential escalation." Blackwell nodded slowly. "I might be able to arrange a meeting. Terms would need to be clear. I want guaranteed access to Wolf Creek for my cattle. I want an end to all harassment, and I want a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing." Wade's voice was firm. "In return, I won't press charges for the property damage." "What about the railroad?" Violet asked. Wade considered this. "If the railroad wants a right-of-way through my land, they can negotiate directly with me like honest businessmen. I won't be bullied into selling, but I'm not opposed to progress if it benefits the territory." Blackwell nodded. "Reasonable terms. I'll approach Hargrove's lawyer in the morning." As they left the sheriff's office, the night air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. Stars blanketed the sky above them, countless points of light in the vastness. "I'm sorry our celebration was interrupted," Wade said as they walked slowly back toward the boarding house. "Don't be," Violet replied. "This is part of our life too, the challenges along with the joys." She looked down at the ring on her finger, which caught the moonlight. "Speaking of celebrations, when shall we have the wedding?" Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "I was thinking October, when the weather is perfect. Unless that's too soon." "October sounds wonderful." Violet smiled up at him. "By then, perhaps all this business with Hargrove will be behind us." "One way or another, it will be," Wade promised. "I won't let anything overshadow our future together." The resolution came more swiftly than anyone had anticipated. Marshal Blackwell, leveraging the attempted bribery charge and substantial evidence of vandalism, presented Clayton Hargrove with a stark choice: face multiple criminal charges that would likely send him to territorial prison, or accept Wade's terms and retire from public life. Hargrove, his reputation already in tatters as rumors spread, chose self-preservation. 2 days after Wade's proposal to Violet, the older rancher signed a binding agreement guaranteeing the Circle A's water rights in perpetuity and acknowledging his regrettable misunderstandings with his neighbor. Within a week, Hargrove announced his intention to sell his ranch and relocate to California for health reasons. The town of Old Tucson celebrated the news as a victory for one of their own against outside influence, for despite his 20 years in the territory, Hargrove had never truly become part of the community, maintaining his eastern airs and separate social circle. For Violet and Wade, the resolution brought a welcome return to normalcy and the ability to focus on their future together. October 12, 1878 was set as their wedding date, giving them just enough time to make preparations without the lengthy engagement that would have been expected in Boston society. Violet wrote to her few remaining relatives in the East, inviting them to the ceremony, but explaining that the distance might make attendance difficult. To her surprise, her mother's younger sister, Aunt Harriet, replied promptly that she would indeed make the journey to ensure my only niece isn't marrying some uncouth frontiersman without proper scrutiny. "She sounds formidable," Wade commented when Violet read him the letter. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, enjoying the cooler September evening. "Aunt Harriet has opinions on everything," Violet admitted, "but her heart is good. She sent money for my ticket west when no one else would help after Father died." "Then I shall be eternally grateful to her," Wade said, bringing Violet's hand to his lips, "even if she finds me uncouth." Preparations for the wedding transformed the town. Mrs. Garcia took charge of the reception arrangements, commandeering the dining room of the boarding house and the adjacent courtyard for the celebration. Mrs. Pendleton, determined that the bride should have a proper gown despite the frontier setting, ordered special fabric from San Francisco. The women of the church formed a sewing circle to help with the dress, turning Violet's simple design into a collaborative labor of love. Wade, meanwhile, worked with Tom and the other ranch hands to prepare the circle for its new mistress. The ranch house received a fresh coat of whitewash, new curtains sewn by Martha Fletcher, and an addition that would serve as a proper bedroom, allowing the existing sleeping space to become a dedicated parlor. "It still won't be what you were used to in Boston," Wade said apologetically as they reviewed his plans one Sunday afternoon. "It will be better," Violet assured him, "because it will be ours." As the wedding day approached, Aunt Harriet arrived by stagecoach, a diminutive woman with steel gray hair and piercing eyes that missed nothing. Her initial assessment of Wade was characteristically blunt. "Well, at least he's tall," she declared after their introduction. "And he looks at you as if you hung the moon, which counts for something." To Wade directly, she added, "I trust you understand what a treasure you're getting, young man." "More than you know, madam," he replied with genuine respect. "Your niece has brought light to my life, and this entire community." This earnest response seemed to satisfy Aunt Harriet, who nodded once before turning her attention to inspecting the wedding arrangements with the same thoroughness she had applied to the prospective groom. The morning of October 12 dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor reception that would follow the church ceremony. Violet stood in her room at the boarding house, where Aunt Harriet and Mrs. Garcia were helping her dress. The gown was simple but elegant ivory cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the skirt falling in clean lines to just above her ankles. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Garcia said, fastening a cameo brooch at Violet's throat. "This was my mother's." "Something blue," Aunt Harriet added, producing a silk handkerchief with blue embroidered edges. "Your mother carried this at her wedding. I've kept it all these years." Violet blinked back tears as she accepted the treasured item. "Thank you, both of you." A knock at the door revealed Mr. Holbrook, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit but determined to fulfill his role. In the absence of her father, Violet had asked her employer to give her away a request that had visibly moved the usually stoic shopkeeper. "It's time," he said gruffly. "And may I say, Miss Brenner, well, you look mighty fine." The small church was filled beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and even peering through the windows from outside. As the simple piano music began, Mrs. Peterson, playing a hymn that served as a wedding march, Violet took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle on Mr. Holbrook's arm. At the altar, Wade waited, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face shining with joy as he watched her approach. Beside him stood Tom Fletcher as best man, looking almost as proud as the groom himself. Reverend Phillips spoke of partnership, of building a life together on the frontier where mutual support was not just romantic but essential for survival. He spoke of the community gathered to witness and uphold this union, friends who had become family through shared hardship and celebration. When it came time for the vows, Wade's voice was clear and unwavering as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Violet through all the days of their lives together. When he placed the gold band on her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his eyes glistened with emotion. Violet's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, the magnitude of the moment washing over her. This was not the life she had planned when she left Boston, but standing here with Wade, surrounded by people who had welcomed her into their community. She knew it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Phillips declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Wade's kiss was gentle but full of promise, the first day of their life together, sealed before witnesses both earthly and divine. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food prepared by many hands, music from local fiddle players that soon had people dancing in the courtyard, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. Even Aunt Harriet unbent enough to accept a dance with Sheriff Cooper, declaring afterward that frontier men have surprisingly good manners when they choose to exercise them. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Wade and Violet slipped away from the festivities. A decorated wagon waited to take them to the Circle, their home now, not just Wade's. Ranch hands had lined the road leading to the house with lanterns, creating a path of light that welcomed them as they arrived at dusk. Wade lifted Violet from the wagon and, in a move that made her laugh with delight, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Andrews," he said as he set her gently on her feet in the main room. Violet looked around at the space that would be the center of their life together, the solid walls Wade had built, the comfortable furniture arranged before the fireplace, the bookshelves now mingling her volumes with his, the new curtains fluttering in the evening breeze. "Home," she repeated, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I like the sound of that." Later, as they lay together in the new bedroom, the connection between them now complete in every sense, Violet marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman sitting alone outside the mercantile to the wife of a man who had seen her need and offered not charity but companionship, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About fate," she replied, nestling closer to him. "About how sometimes our greatest disappointments lead us exactly where we're meant to be, like a teaching position that was already filled." There was a smile in his voice, exactly like that. Violet pressed a kiss to his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her lips. "I came west seeking independence and found something far more precious." "And what's that, Mrs. Andrews?" She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes, now silver in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Partnership. A love built on mutual respect and shared dreams." Her hand caressed his cheek. "A future I never could have imagined that day you found me sitting alone outside the store." "Best thing I ever did," Wade said, pulling her down for a kiss, "was stop and offer company to a beautiful stranger." Epilogue. 5 years later, the spring roundup at the Circle was finished, the last of the calves branded and counted, the hands paid and given a few days' rest before the summer work began in earnest. Wade Andrews stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind him, the sounds of home filled the evening air, Violet's voice reading a story to their daughter Emma, who at 3 years old was already showing her mother's love of books. 4-year-old William's laughter as he played with the wooden horse Uncle Tom had carved for his last birthday. Baby Joseph's contented gurgling from his cradle in the corner. The ranch had prospered over the past 5 years. The railroad had indeed come through the territory, though the final route crossed only the southernmost corner of Circle land. The compensation had been fair. Wade had seen to that personally, negotiating directly with the railroad executives, and the improved transportation had made shipping cattle to eastern markets more profitable. Old Tucson had grown as well, nearly doubling in size with the arrival of the railroad. Mr. Holbrook had expanded the mercantile, adding a second floor with a dedicated space that now served as the town's first proper schoolhouse, where Violet taught 3 mornings each week, bringing Emma and William with her, while Martha Fletcher watched baby Joseph at the ranch. Violet had blossomed as both teacher and rancher's wife, balancing her work in town with her role at the Circle A. She had learned to ride well enough to help with gentle roundup work, could manage the ranch books with the same efficiency she had brought to the mercantile, and had established a small but impressive garden that supplied fresh vegetables even in the challenging desert climate. The sound of the door opening behind him drew Wade from his reflections. Violet stepped onto the porch, slipping her arm around his waist. "Emma finally fell asleep," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That new book from Aunt Harriet was too exciting for bedtime, I think." Wade chuckled. "She's curious like her mother, and stubborn like her father." Violet's tone was affectionate. "William went down without a fuss, thank goodness, and Joseph has been sleeping for an hour already." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the landscape. The cottonwoods along Wolf Creek rustled in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Not going to Santa Fe? Not having the teaching position you'd planned?" Violet looked up at him, surprised by the question after all this time. "What brought this on?" Wade shrugged slightly. "Just thinking about how different your life might have been. Different, yes. Better, no." Violet turned to face him fully, her hands resting on his chest. "Wade Andrews, I have a husband I adore, 3 beautiful children, work that fulfills me both here and in town, and a community that has become family. What possible regrets could I have, when you put it that way?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "Besides," she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "if that position hadn't been filled, I wouldn't have been sitting alone outside the store when a handsome cowboy decided I looked like I could use company." "Best decision I ever made," Wade said, lowering his lips to hers. Stopping to talk to the pretty stranger with the sad eyes. "And the best twist of fate I ever experienced," Violet replied when they parted, "was having a door close in Santa Fe so a better one could open right here." As twilight deepened around them, Wade and Violet Andrews stood together on the porch of the home they had built, not just the physical structure, but the life they had created together. From a chance encounter born of desperation and kindness, had grown a love as enduring as the land that surrounded them, as promising as the western sky above, and as true as the journey that had brought them together.